Okay, so for this recipe to make homemade watercolor paint, we're going to make little cakes of paint. So this is actually going to be a watercolor paint that's going to dry. It's not going to be liquid watercolor like we typically make. So for this recipe, I pulled a recipe off the internet that didn't really work for me, so I'm going to use a recipe and kind of alter it a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 4 tablespoons of baking powder. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to add 2.5 tablespoons of white vinegar. And you see that the vinegar and the baking soda are reacting and creating a gas. I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of corn syrup. And 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. All right, so now I'm going to stir this up. And it's going to be difficult to stir. And it's going to create a non-Newtonian fluid. So again, it's going to act as both a liquid and a solid here. So just make sure you get it all incorporated there. Now, the reason I used this mixing cup with a spout is because I'm going to now pour my paints into a tin. Now, I happen to have this awesome little donut hole tin that we are not using for donuts right now, to bake donuts. So I'm going to use this to create my paint cakes in here. You can use an ice cube tray, you can use any of those like little silicone things, whatever you want to do. So I'm just going to pour a little bit of paint into each one of these, and you see the paint is still white, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to mix the paint colors in once I have the tray filled up. That way I can again create a large batch of paint and then put the colors in individually into the little cakes. All right, so I have all of these filled, and now I'm going to take my food coloring, and the more food coloring you use in there, obviously the more vibrant the color will be. Now you see I just spurted food coloring there, so you do need to be careful. So since I've got some pink in there, I'm going to use this one up here for the yellow. All right, I'm not sure what other colors I'm going to use, but I'm just going to start stirring this. So again, you need to stir it so that it is completely incorporated there. So you see I have my dried paints here. I'm very excited about this. I put them outside in the sunshine, and it was pretty warm outside yesterday, so they dried in about 6 hours. So depending on the climate, it may take more time than that to dry, but you can touch the surface of them to see that they're dry. So there's the paints that we're going to use today. We're going to have a cup of water, we have several paint brushes, and we also have several different types of paper. So we just have copier paper, construction paper, cardstock, and we actually have watercolor paper, which, if you can see, has a texture on it. And watercolor paper is nice because it absorbs the water better than these other papers are going to do that. So, but it's a little more expensive, so if we're just going to work on some process art, we may just save this for some finished pieces that we want to work on later. So we're just going to use normal paper, normal copier paper. right now to start our project and see how our paints work. I'm very excited to try these out. So we will get started. Okay. All right, so I have my trusty artist here, Madeline, and she's going to demonstrate how we're going to paint with these watercolor paints. So the first thing you need to do when using watercolor paints is you need to get the cakes of watercolor wet. So she's going to dip her brush into the water, and she's going to check that orange out, and she's going to do that several times to get a nice puddle on the top of that surface of the paint. All right, and once she feels that it's adequately wet, she's then going to paint on the surface of the paper. Oh, so that's yellow. I thought it was orange. Look at that. All right, so keep going, Mads. So every time Madeline's going to switch colors, she's also going to make sure that she rinses off her brush so she's not cross-contaminating the colors of paint. She's going to give it a nice swirl there, you see that. And now she's going to move to green. So she's going to repeat the process that she did with yellow, and she's going to get that nice and wet. These are by far the best watercolor paints I think I've ever used. So I'm super excited because they're very inexpensive to make, and the colors and the way they dry is amazing. The corn syrup in there makes them have a nice sheen when they dry. So I'm very pleased with not only the process of painting with these, but also the end product is really quite nice. We have a high there on our paper. All right, so now we're going to show you a couple of other techniques that you can use when you are painting. Okay, so now we have switched to that watercolor paper, and we just cut a little piece of it off because we're doing some test samples. And Madeline's going to show us a technique where she's going to get the paper pretty saturated with water. So she's going to keep dipping her brush into the water and then putting that water on the surface of the paper. It's obviously hard to see because the water is clean, so it's not adding any color. After she's done doing that, she's going to choose a color that she would like to add to that water, and she's actually just going to touch the surface of the water very gently, and the color is now going to bleed on into that puddle of water, and then it will bleed into the water as well. So she's added some green, and I think she's going to choose another color. So she's going to choose the lighter green color. Let's see how that looks. And so she's putting some highlights there with that. And she suggested that this might be a nice way to make a tree or some other type of plant. So that's really fun. Now, this is really, really wet. So if I picked it up right now, it would drip down the paper, which would also be another cool thing to try. Well, actually, no, let's just try it. But if you want to keep it as is, you're going to have to let it sit horizontally, because that's what will happen if you pick it up too soon before the water has evaporated and gone into the paper. All right, so that's one technique. Now Maddie's going to show us another technique, and we're just going to take a regular piece of paper, and we are going to, Maddie's going to pick a few colors of her paint just again to get that paint wet. The cakes of paint wet. So she's just really getting that paint saturated here. You can't see she's choosing the red there. And while she's doing that, I have some parchment paper here. You could use wax paper, and I'm going to ball it up nice and tight. and get it nice and crinkled, so it's going to have all those little wrinkles all over it. So then what Maddie's going to do, instead of using a paintbrush to paint, she's going to paint with this paper by putting it into the cake paint and dabbing at the paper. So you see that's kind of making a really like spots all over the paper and irregularly. Now what she's noticed is that she didn't get enough water on that paint and didn't get it wet enough so that she wasn't picking up enough of the color. So she just went and added more water. And this could be a field of flowers or berries. Could be whatever you want it to be. So that's another way that we can create with the watercolor paints. So I'd love to see some of your creations, and I hope you all have fun with your watercolor cakes.